It's the all-new GovTech360, the collision of government, technology, and the future.
Agile Millennials cutting code for the future, and a distinctly European turn on privacy, right here at home. We're making the pivots with two of the country's doers, dreamers, and drivers. And all of that on the premiere of a new podcast from Government Technology.
Here's Paul and Noel.
From the Government Navigator Studios, I'm Paul Taylor with Government Technology Editor Noel Nell. Hi there.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
Never better. On this debut episode of GovTech360, we're tapping two of this year's top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers, whose work is particularly on point with new podcast. Picking favorites is hard, but we did it. Tell me about favorite number one.
Well, it's hard enough narrowing the field of top 25 down to that 25, never mind just two. But as you said, we've chosen a couple whose body of work fits really well with the theme of the podcast. First up is Ed Toner. He's the state CIO for Nebraska. When appointed in 2015, he took on the heavy lifting that many state CIOs are in some stage of, enterprise consolidation, both technology and people. And with that in the win column, other doors are starting to open for him.
Welcome to Boop. As our name suggests, our mainframe connects to and powers virtually every server on the globe.
Toner knew he couldn't compete with even a made-up big name on the internet, but as a brilliant episode of Family Guy suggests, he wanted what they had.
Millennials crave things like instant gratification, authentic experiences, and for some reason we haven't figured out yet, improv comedy.
With the help of a real-life local college, Ed found millennials who were willing to delay gratification for an authentic experience in public service.
Yeah, his developers had way more work than they can handle. They already had a waterfall team and were fostering an Agile team with a view to transitioning over time to all Agile. It gave them lots of flexibility, just not enough capacity. Ed says they were way behind and they were willing to make a deal with millennials who code and those who teach them.
We didn't have enough talent to really fill the orders that we were getting for work. The state was very, at that time, really looking to automate, and our tool helps in that automation. And we had about 20,000 hours of development that we were behind. And so we needed to get help, and we needed it quickly. And so we went to the local community college. They helped us. They asked us about the curriculum that we would like to see. We are an Agile development shop, and so we wanted them to get Agile training and some of the basic programming skills. And then we brought them on as special office staff, which meant they weren't an intern. They were actually paid very similar to an entry-level employee. And then within their goal, they knew was to become billable for us within 6 months. And if they did, we brought them on board. To date, we brought in over 40.
I thought it's interesting that Ed realized that he could not outsource all this Agile goodness. Also, I think it's significant that the millennials are Agile natives and they don't have any old skills to unlearn.
That's exactly right. The partnership with the colleges was a great kickstart for the process and provides a continuing pipeline for his shop. But Ed says moving to Agile requires a continuous investment in training.
I think that's really my biggest advice is if you're going to go Agile, make sure that you train. You provide the training beyond what they receive at the college or the community college. We have coaches that we pay for to continue to educate our workforce. Now we're really at a point where it's starting to organically grow. So whenever an Agile team is working with a waterfall team, the waterfall team has really adapted to the Agile development. Our Agile development teams don't really understand the waterfall piece, so the waterfall teams have to adapt to the Agile.
Don't go chasing waterfalls. We were GovTech when GovTech wasn't cool. This is GovTech360.
A commercial word now. Market Navigator is the only sales intelligence tool focused exclusively on the $100 billion state and local government IT market. Powered by eRepublic, the largest, most experienced team of state and local government market experts, some of whom you'll meet here on GovTech360. Navigator is unmatched in depth and coverage of technology spending, RFPs, developing opportunities, jurisdictions, and buyers in states, cities, and counties. Find out more at govtech.com/navigator. We travel to the Northwest for favorite number 2 from Government Technology's Triple Ds. On the re-emergent issue of privacy, which casts a long shadow at the intersection of government technology and the future. And there's someone in Seattle who is working hard to figure it all out.
Her name is Ginger Armbruster, named almost 2 years ago as Seattle Chief Privacy Officer. From the ground up, she and her team have built the City Privacy Program, which defines how Seattle collects, uses, and disposes of personally identifiable information. That data in aggregate form is also the fuel of smart cities. I asked Armbruster about the trade-offs.
You've talked about the potential privacy dangers in embracing certain smart city technologies, a phenomenon of, well-meaning people in government agreeing to quote unquote free digital services that are paid for in citizen data. Is there a way for cities to embrace smarter technologies while protecting citizen privacy?
I believe there is, and I think it starts with an acknowledgement that nothing is for free. So smart technology, certainly the trade-off about employing it has to be weighed against what do you do with all the information you're collecting. And I think acknowledging that and recognizing it's not just plug it in and let's go, like we might in our own homes with Alexa and other technologies, that we have to take into account that this isn't just our world, it's the public's information we're dealing with. So when I sit down with different departments, that's part of the very first part of the conversation is, okay, what are we going to do with the data we're collecting? What data do you need? Why do you need it? And I believe there is a way to do this. It's just acknowledging that what you can collect and what you can get out of smart technologies is not necessarily what you want, at least as a city entity. You're going to have to find a way to recognize that privacy will be impacted if you give out all of the bike share information and give people's route information. I think we're seeing that playing out in LA right now around data and concerns about what does that mean if someone rents a scooter and I know everything about where they went that day. So I think that's the way that I approach it with everyone is great technology. I certainly see the benefits for your mission. Let's talk about the data. How can we make this less invasive for folks so they will want to embrace this technology so that you can now use privacy as a way to promote this technology beyond just the benefits for whatever you're trying to accomplish. That's how I approach it.
A couple of interesting things here. The way that Armbruster approaches it in 2019 is different than the way that she would have done it a decade ago. Then every transaction began and ended with a paper form. Now, of course, public records include all the data extracted from devices, particularly phones, the ones used to unlock bike shares, pay parking meters, and conduct almost any other kind of transactions that take place voluntarily on an app. Now, you told me that she's also thinking about personal data that come from involuntary encounters between residents and their government.
Yes, people are often compelled to give up information about themselves in exchange for public services. Again, Ginger says there are sensitive trade-offs to be navigated here.
And then this issue of public records, I don't want to have that be misinterpreted as lack of transparency on the government level. What it is for me is we should know everything government is up to, but we shouldn't know everything about the people who get those services. I shouldn't necessarily be able to see all the private details of people getting services from the city, because when you get a service from the city of Seattle, you're either having a really bad day, you're having a medical emergency, or maybe you've interacted with our police for some reason, or you need services because you're a member of a vulnerable community and you are needing services from your community. So it seems to me that we collect too much and that too much of that is available because of public records. So that's the thing I'd like to see if there's something we can do something about.
Doing something about it means getting traction in a pretty fluid environment, legislatively speaking. It's one that at the local level is still pretty squishy. That is thanks in no small part to the effects of the EU General Data Protection Regulation, or as it's more commonly known, GDPR. Now a year old, it covers data and privacy in the European Union and beyond. The export provision of GDPR touches companies that do business in Europe, and now, of course, with the internet, that's a large universe of companies, including most American companies. Ginger spoke hopefully about a Washington state privacy bill during the interview. Louis Ropek on your staff followed the bill throughout the legislative session, including the tussle between privacy rights advocates and big tech. And he chronicled the bill's collapse in the closing days of the session. It's a really good and important read, and we've got a link to it in the show notes at govtech.com.
Ginger doesn't think that cities or even states can do their own thing in the era of GDPR. She thinks that a national policy may be the only thing that keeps things coherent for international players that are based in the United States.
I don't think that's sustainable for companies that do business around the world to have different small states have their own versions of this. I don't know how a Microsoft or an Amazon, that's a huge endeavor. How do I make sure California and Washington are both happy? Oh, something happening over here in Oregon. I believe that we're going to see the technology companies wanting to push for a federal legislation around this so that they have one set of rules. That's what I believe. And I believe that we've seen some of the large companies involved in some of the state activities, probably hoping to get these sort of in alignment. I also know some of the large companies have simply said, we're making GDPR functional for everybody because we can't keep two different systems going. What we're willing to put up with in the private sector, we are not willing to put up with in the public sector.
And that is the dilemma right there. People have higher expectations of how their data is handled by government than by the private sector, where people readily hand over personal information for a book recommendation or a couple dollars off a pizza.
And I think that difference is sometimes lost on GovTech startups, whose founders may have backgrounds in retail, services, or fintech. As we wrapped up our conversation with Ginger, we asked her about that too.
There are so many good ideas out there about how to make life better, right? Oh, how can I help the city, and how can I see a need, and they're probably right on. From the privacy perspective, what I want those companies to have done is their homework around their privacy and data policies. What do you do with the data you collect? Because so much of the business models are around, I'm going to collect data and I'm going to sell it over here. I'm going to use it in this other way while I provide this service to the city that they need. And that may be okay, but I need to be able to get answers to the questions. What are you doing? So I would love companies to come in with a clear idea of their data collection practices and what they're using the data for, and their privacy policy. What do we protect, and what are we doing? So that I don't have to, I've been a couple of times asked to build somebody's privacy policy. That was sort of interesting. Which in my mind is I can't tell you your business model. You have to tell me, and I can't build you your privacy policy, so you need to do that for me. I also want companies to understand the legal landscape of the city and state that they're in. We've had people come in who have no idea about our Public Records Act, and so they get really surprised when they find out that everything is public. So we don't want all that information you're trying to tell us as a benefit. I actually prefer not to have it. So understanding the legal landscape, both at the city level and at the state level, so that they understand the privacy limitations that we have as they're promoting whatever they're promoting. And then I also think companies tend to go into the departments and get people sold on benefits, and that's great. I mean, I used to be a salesperson. That's certainly what you want to do: generate the interest, make sure you have someone to sponsor you, but not waiting too long to get involved with the compliance side of the house, right? Don't wait too long before you talk to the privacy and security people. Don't wait too long before you realize they're going to be the ones who say, nah, it's not going to happen until I've had a chance to review. So there's a lot of delay that can happen while someone's trying to sell something that can be a real disappointment, and it can be a real tension. So get involved early with the legal side of the house. Make sure you've covered your bases on those compliance issues.
And that's the last word from Ginger Armbruster, the Chief Privacy Officer for Seattle.
Noelle, thanks for bringing both of these guests to the table. As we said at the top, there are a total of 25 dreamers, doers, and drivers. How can listeners read more about the whole list and assuage our guilt for picking only 2 for the podcast?
Yes, please go visit and read the profiles of all 25 at govtech.com. Search for top 25. We've got the individual profiles and infographic and all kinds of interesting information that kind of sums up this group.
Noelle Nell, editor of Government Technology. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Our colleague, co-host, and chief innovator, Dustin Heisler, has been listening in. What did you hear in the conversation with Ed Toner?
We've talked at length about this talent gap that exists in the public sector. And I think they've really shown in Nebraska that solving the talent gap requires creative approaches. And for them, that was going to a community college and partnering and kind of using that as a resource to incubate talent. But this is something that agencies have to look beyond just the benefits they provide. A flexible work day is not going to get someone to come and work for you. You have to really look at going to where they're at and finding a way to incubate the talent there. And then eventually you can start to see the results like Nebraska has seen with getting talent to come back.
And what about the chat with Ginger and the privacy pivot?
her takeaways are really telling when it comes to what's just happening kind of in the national landscape around privacy. And three things that stood out for me on her interview is, number one, we have to start to think about designing for data's use. And so, she asked questions about, what are we doing with the data that we're collecting? What data do you need? Why do you need it? How do we make it less invasive? These are all questions that should be asked as a part of any type of procurement process, as we're, even before that, as we're kind of designing what solution we need to solve the problems that we have. We need to start to think about the role that data plays in that and how we design for data's use inside of our agencies. The second thing that stood out is this unsolved challenge. How do we abstract what we know about people while providing them better service delivery? And so, Ginger said she would love for companies to come in with a clear idea of their data collection practices and what they're using the data for, and a robust privacy policy. And I think, this is something that the market really needs to move on. Companies that are in the space need to start to think about helping government solve this challenge. How do we abstract all of the personal identifiable information that's not necessary, but sometimes we still need to know as a part of the experience delivery, while not kind of creating risk in the process. And the third thing was that a more holistic approach to data regulation is coming. And it's going to come first through state and local policy, which we've seen. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing chief privacy officers pop up at the state level and city level across the country, but eventually through a national policy, which could be a US equivalent of GDPR. So agencies today really need to be thinking about and preparing their data management practices for the inevitable rise of additional regulations as it relates to government's role in this whole process.
That's helpful as always, Dustin. What are you working on?
Cutting through, the marketing hype cycle of the shiny objects and into how we can practically use technology, data, new processes to solve real problems in government.
Thanks, man. We will explore those later in the season on GovTech360. Connect with us on Twitter. Noel Nell is at GovTech Noel. Dustin is at Dustin Heisler. I'm at PW Taylor. And the whole shooting match is at GovTech News. You can help spread the word about the brand new GovTech360 by leaving a review at Apple Podcasts. We'd appreciate that more than you know. Subscribe for free to GovTech360 on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. And it's always available at home, govtech.com. For all of us at Government Technology, thanks for listening.
We're out of time. Bye-bye.